We are very, very lucky to have a lunchtime speaker with us today. It's sponsored by the Housing Commission of Anne Arundel County. Thank you to the Housing Commission. But it's my pleasure to invite to the podium Senator Jeff Waldstreicher.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Please keep eating, keep drinking. I will take no offense. There are more people than I anticipated here today. That's incredible. And actually, that's kind of what I came to talk to you about, to talk about more. My name is Jeff Waldstreicher. It's my honor to serve in the State Senate down the road from here. I sit on the Judicial Proceedings Committee where I serve as vice chair, and we have a lot of the housing issues that come before us. And today I want to talk about more and what more means. Not Governor Westmore, though I promise I'll have more on more in a moment. I wanted to talk today about more, as in more housing. More is the future of housing. That means more affordable housing, more mixed income housing, more market housing, more middle income housing, more housing styles, more help for renters, more help for first-time homeowners, more incentives for developers to move more quickly, more commercial to residential conversions, more experimentation and more pilot programs, more Westmore housing bills, more challenging mores about local control, a little less talk, a little more action, if you please. Let's unpack a few of those. We need more affordable housing, and that's why we're all here today. We used to have more, but more and more we have less. We overthink this at our peril. When veterans were returning from World War II, we had more land, more home builders, and less government red tape. And so it wasn't difficult to build housing for more of the middle-income folks who needed more affordable housing. There were always home builders who built exclusively for the rich, but the market was working relatively efficiently, so that created a niche for other home builders to build more homes for the not-so-rich. Today, things are different. We have less land, and that, of course, we can't control. But we also have more government red tape. In combination, these two factors disincentivize more affordable housing. If you're a home builder now with less land, you have less opportunity to make a profit. And for each home you build, you have to go through a more arduous government approval process than previously. Meanwhile, the costs of bricks are the same if you build that house for the affluent or for the middle class. The cost of labor is the same if you build for the affluent or the middle class. And so with less land and more fixed costs, the best place for us as policymakers to find a solution is obvious. For more affordable housing, we must have less government red tape and more incentive to build it. And that brings me to Westmore. We need more policymakers who think like Governor Moore. We need more government officials who are more willing to question more of the laws and regulations that restrict home building. We need more folks like Westmore with the courage to challenge changing mores about local control, while also partnering with those same local officials to get more done. You heard from Secretary Day here today. He is an incredible leader. Between he and Governor Moore, they've provided a national model for how to achieve more housing. Again, overcomplicating this is counterproductive to our goals. Governor Moore did three big things. One, he stated outright his values. We need more affordable housing in Maryland. Two, he indicated clearly state government has a substantial role to play in building more housing and must be at the table when it comes to policymaking. Three, this was achieved not through fighting or combativeness, but through partnership. State government must work hand in glove with local government in order to advance our shared goal to increase affordable housing. And so we need more and more. I've encouraged Governor Moore to continue putting in more bills on this topic so we can achieve more of our goals together. And if we are to advance those goals nationwide, I need each and every one of you to contact your friends and allies in other states to ask their governors to be more like Moore on this critical issue. We also need more experimentation. Pilot programs provide control tests for us to gather more data about new ideas and then come back to forums like this conference to show our work and spread more knowledge. I've passed 3 pilot programs in Annapolis that promote more housing. The first pilot program provides additional incentives to convert empty or underutilized commercial buildings into new housing. Now, obviously, there's been a lot of discussion about this critical issue. Commercial to residential is one of the keys to building more housing faster, but we also know that it's not a panacea. We're gathering data on this pilot program, but we believe that it's working. The second pilot program is to incentivize more social housing. Social housing is a model that has found success in Europe, and Montgomery County's version of this received a very long, very detailed, and incredibly complimentary profile in the New York Times. Our Maryland pilot program seeks to take this model statewide by providing seed money to local governments to try out this model and then report back to us. The third pilot program isn't to build more housing, but to keep people in their homes that they already live in. And it is perhaps our most creative pilot, but simultaneously also our most obvious. Too many renters lose their housing because they lose their jobs. Separately, in many of our counties, we have incredible workforce agencies that connect folks to employment and get them back on their feet quickly. So I thought, well, what if we could combine these forces, connecting renters directly with workforce agencies? And that's exactly what we did. Starting on October 1, a pilot program is in Montgomery County and Prince George's County, and it literally embeds workforce agency employees in our rent courts. When someone can't pay their rent due to unemployment, the workforce employee is right there to help the renter get back on their feet. And I hope to be able to report back to you next year so we can expand this program to Anne Arundel County and indeed across the state. So let me just conclude where I began today. We're a small state. We deal with so many of these policy issues, it's easy to forget. We're a really small state, and Anne Arundel County is not a particularly large county, even within this small state. But we can be something much more. But that requires us to embrace the power of more. So I want you to kind of leave here today and spread the word. More housing benefits all of us. And as we build more housing of all types, tell more folks about the work we are doing together. More and more, leaders across this nation will speak about Maryland not just as another state, but as the national leader when it comes to affordable housing. Thank you so much for having me here today.
Hi again, everyone. We are moving on to panel 3, which is around Maryland tenants' rights, rental housing laws, and protection. It's sponsored by Rosenberg, Martin Greenberg, LLP, and our moderator is our own lovely Lisa Sarro. Lisa.
So good afternoon, everyone. I probably could use that little booster, but I'm just going to move this down a little bit instead. My name is Lisa Sarro, and I am General Counsel at Arundel Community Development Services. You've heard a little bit about ACDS today. What I've been doing at ACDS for the past 4 years or so is really focusing on eviction prevention, emergency rental assistance, and the response to the COVID crisis. I have the honor and privilege of speaking today with these wonderful panelists. I'll tell you a little bit about them. I'm going to try and do them in the order that they're here, even though that's not the order I have them on my sheet. Matt Hill is here with Public Justice Center. Matt is really a rock star in terms of tenant advocacy and a real expert on renters' rights and laws affecting renters in the state. We also have Dr. Hanifin Bonner, who is with Arundel Connecting Together. We've heard quite a bit about Arundel Connecting Together Act today as well. We have Alice Wilkerson next up, who is Executive Director of Advanced Maryland. And then we are fortunate to have Delegate Bernice Mireku-North here today, also State Delegate from Montgomery County. So we're at an affordable housing symposium. Why do we have a renters' rights and a symposium or a section specifically on renters? The reason for that is, as one of my colleagues said recently, we cannot build our way out of the affordable housing crisis in our state, in our country, and certainly not in our county. So what we need to do is have a lot of tools in our tool belt. And one of those tools is how we treat and connect with those folks who already are in affordable housing. Safe, affordable, stable housing. For those of you who have heard me speak before, housing is everything. Housing is everything. Without stable housing, it's hard to get a job. It's hard to keep a job. It's hard to maintain your health if you don't have some place to lay your head every night. And you know that the next night you're going to be able to lay your head there too. And then imagine children who are living with housing instability or living in homes that are not safe for them. All of these things are things that we need to address as a community to ensure that not only are we building new housing for folks who don't yet have housing, but we're making sure that those who do have housing are living well and living healthfully. So we're going to talk first. Let me just give you a little roadmap about what we're going to do and what our panelists are going to talk about. Matt is going to start us off talking about some of the legislative successes from last session that will really help improve the lives of renters in our state. We heard some about the governor's package. There are additional bills that Matt's going to talk about, some good successes that we had last year. Then we're going to have, after Matt, Delegate Mireku-North is going to talk about some of the laws related to housing that are expected to be introduced in the next session, including possibly a discussion of the General Assembly's response to the recent Supreme Court decision at Grants Pass that essentially criminalized homelessness, and perhaps some other tidbits that she may have from her colleagues. Alice Wilkerson's going to talk with us a bit about sort of the state of housing nationally at the macro level. Housing is having a minute right now. It's kind of first time probably for most of us that we've heard presidential candidates talking about housing as a key issue. I don't remember that ever coming up in a presidential campaign, and I've heard more of them than I care to admit. And then we'll talk also with Dr. Hanifin Bonner, who will bring things back to the micro level and how local organizations, grassroots organizations, are working to improve the lives of renters here in our county. And she'll talk about what's working and what's going on. And then Matt and I will wrap it back up. We're missing one of our panelists, but Matt and I will wrap it back up with what we expect tenant advocates to be promoting as the new session starts. And so with that, before I say another word, I just want to say that if I share an opinion, which I undoubtedly will do because I can't help myself. I'm speaking for myself, not for ACDS, and certainly not for Anne Arundel County. So all opinions are my own and cannot be blamed on anyone but myself. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt to talk about the laws that were passed. And I'm looking at a remote here. Am I doing the? Give it to Matt. Okay. Thanks, Matt.
Okay.
So good afternoon again. My name is Matt Hill. I'm an attorney at the Public Justice Center. And Public Justice Center, I'll be talking about two specific bills that passed in the last legislative session, the Tenant Safety Act and the Eviction Prevention Funds and Community School Bill. I'm just going to go to the next slide because, let's see. First, and you'll see the branding in a minute, but Public Justice Center is part of a group statewide called the Renters United Maryland, which is a coalition of advocates and legal services providers and grassroots groups from around the state who come together and really focus on issues of concern throughout the state. So there are a number of partners here that we do all this work with, and I want to acknowledge the ones that I see, and I hope others will raise their hands. First, Community Legal Services. Hi. Thank you. Fantastic partners. Do incredible eviction prevention work and housing habitability work here in Anne Arundel County and in other jurisdictions. I know ACDS and Lisa Sarro, Advance and Alice. Any other Renters United Maryland organizations who I missed so far represented today? All this group is done in partnership with our partners around the state. Again, bringing that kind of expertise, bringing whether it's lived experience with eviction, with uninhabitable housing, or lobbying or communications work. So it really is a real important coalition. And I'll talk a little bit more about how you can join us toward the end. But first, moving on to the first bill that passed with all that support is the Tenant Safety Act in 2024. So when landlords don't keep up their properties, when they allow the roof to continue to leak, when the heat doesn't work, it impacts both renters, right, and the entire community. And so it's really important to hold landlords accountable. And so we know that supply is important. I totally agree. We need more housing, especially more affordable housing. But we also have to make sure that it's fair, safe, and habitable housing. And when the rent escrow process is the main way that tenants can hold their landlords accountable right now in Maryland. But it's not really working very well. We know that there's about 66,000 moderately or severely inadequate rental dwelling units in the state of Maryland. Only about 2,000 rent escrow cases filed each year. Rent escrow, again, you put your money into escrow with the court until the landlord makes the repairs. A lot of reasons for that. Also, we knew that only 6% of renters got meaningful rent reduction through a rent escrow, right? Why, as a landlord, should I actually invest money and make those repairs if my business model is just take all the rent and don't do anything, if I'm not going to be held really accountable and there are not going to be significant penalties? And so that's where we come up with the Tenant Safety Act. First, clarifying that tenants in the same apartment complex with similar issues can join together to hold their landlords accountable. Bringing people together, putting their rent into court together, getting those rent reductions together brings more pressure to bear on landlords to hold them accountable. This is a picture of one of the rallies that Renters United Maryland helped to host, and one of our speakers from Progressive Maryland. Making court more accessible. Right? A lot of my clients before this bill passed, they didn't have every single penny that the landlord said was due and owing. No rent escrow for you, go home, too bad you don't have heat, maybe the county will get around to helping you someday. That doesn't work. So make it more accessible where renters can put their money into escrow up front, but have the court evaluate that request to reduce the rent up front. And have a presumption that the rent is going to be reduced. If a landlord's not upholding their end of the deal, then the presumption should be that that rent is reduced. Warranty of habitability, damages, right? If you paid the rent and you didn't get what you paid for, you should get some of that money back. You should be able to terminate the lease, get your security deposit back, get relocation expenses. You should be able to get your attorney paid for, right? Attorney's fees to the prevailing tenant. If the landlord didn't do what they're supposed to do, then renters should have access to legal counsel, because guess what? The landlords have access to legal counsel. And so this is a way to help level the playing field if the landlord that loses the case has to pay for the tenant's attorneys. That's another good shot of the coalition that we brought together to Annapolis to advocate for this bill. Again, just emphasizing this is a whole group effort of communications, lobbying, and making sure that the policy is really responsive to the needs of our coalition and our renters in our group. Second, eviction prevention funds. This is again another critical issue. How do we keep people from becoming homeless? How do we stop evictions? Well, we need to hold landlords accountable, and we also need to make sure that when someone faces, let's say they got their car was stolen, right? Let's say they had to go to the hospital and they had a huge hospital bill and they couldn't work for a month. These things happen to my clients all the time. And so there's a real unmet need for 1 to 3 months of rental assistance to help those renters get over that short-term crisis. We learned this during the pandemic, right? That wasn't the 1 to 3 month part, but it was a definite opportunity to show that if you can help people to get over that short-term crisis, they can get back on their feet, they can start paying the rent, and we can stop evictions and homelessness. We did it during the pandemic. Evictions went down to an incredible record low because of the policies that were put into place, because of the emergency rental assistance, because people had more access to learn their legal rights. So we said, well, wait a second. We know we can do this. How do we convince people that we should have a Maryland where evictions and homelessness are a record low all the time, not just during a pandemic? And so we worked with a group called Steuart, Rissius, and Ross, and a coalition called the Maryland Eviction Prevention Funds Alliance to put together a report to say, look, how many evictions could we prevent? How many people could we stop from becoming homeless if we just had a little bit of money in the grand scheme of things to put toward keeping people in their homes? And so if you're interested, there's a really fascinating report all about evictions and how the state can help people to avoid homelessness with this kind of short-term assistance. Again, at the $40 million, we could stop the eviction of 15,000 families who are at the highest risk of homelessness. Again, more about the report, and again, special shout out to Alice in advance, who worked with me on weekends and overnights putting together the graphics and the communications pieces for this report. And the other point that we made through this report is that eviction prevention actually saves the state money, right? For every dollar spent on eviction prevention saves the state $2.39. Why? I think Lisa might have said this. I can't remember. Housing's everything, right? Housing is everything. When we talk about preventing homelessness, that's state-funded homeless shelters. We talk about foster care and people who have to, their kids go into foster care at times because they don't have a stable place to live. Guess who pays for that foster care? We all do. At least $30,000 a year to pay for that foster care. Helping people hold on to their jobs. If you don't have a house, you're not going to be able to hold on to that job. Better access to health care, education stability. Someone brought up the fact that we haven't talked enough about righting racial wrongs in the context of housing. 100% agree. I had to shorten this presentation, but we have a whole other section on talking about the disparate impact of evictions on folks of color, specifically because of racist government policies at all levels, federal, state, local, and all institutions. That's why we have so many black and brown folks who are being evicted. And we need to think about that, talk about it, and one way to address that is to make sure that folks, if you fall behind, if you're living on the edge, you're not going to be evicted. You're not going to become homeless. So big push, press conferences, rallies, and we have a bill, and it passed, and it's now the law that is going to direct emergency rental assistance or eviction prevention funds to families whose children are in community schools. So these are schools that generally have a lower income population, and the state has already putting in billions of dollars to create supportive services for those families. And so the thinking was, well, if we have to start somewhere, let's start with the families and the kids who need access to those supportive services, who don't need to be evicted out of that network that they're developing. And so the General Assembly put $5 million specifically into this Community Schools and Eviction Prevention Funds bill for FY25. Very exciting. And so this is going to be administered by the DHCD and Secretary Day. I want to thank Secretary Day and DHCD as well as the Department of Education for supporting this bill and administering it. It's got very broad eligibility, very broad uses, and so we know that there's $5 million for FY25. Honestly, it's a drop in the bucket compared to the $40 million we need, but it's a start. And we have another $5 million through the budget process for additional eviction prevention funds, even outside of community schools. We're now in partnership with DHCD thinking through how do we show that this is effective, right? You want to get more money for a program, you want to be able to show that the program is effective. What data do we collect? Again, we know 10 million is not enough, but how do we distribute that equitably? What limitations are important? And then the study I told you about from Steuart also talks a lot about the best practices that Maryland learned during the pandemic. How can we incorporate those best practices into this program moving forward? So we're very excited about that, and I'm told by the department that they're hoping to launch by December 1st. And so if you are working with families whose kids are in community schools and they are facing that kind of need for eviction prevention funds, it should be coming again by December 1st. Let's see, Secretary Derry talked about the governor's renters' rights bill, so I'll skip over that, and that will conclude the presentation. Oh, no, it won't, because we put together this great handout, and I know I said earlier that I would tell you a little more about Renters United Maryland, and so please, I'm happy to pass these out to anybody who wants one. I didn't bring one for everyone, but we have a two-pager about the Tenant Safety Act. So how can renters exercise these rights? How can they hold their landlords accountable? Also information about Renters United Maryland, or if you just Google Renters United Maryland, it'll be the first thing that pops up. You can have access to the sheet. If your organization's interested in joining us, I'm going to talk, I think, at the end now, since our colleague Ninfa can't join us, about the agenda for 2025. And your senators, your delegates are extremely important to being able to enact additional protections and rights for renters throughout the state. And so please join us. Your organization can join us, or if you just want to get emails about upcoming events, upcoming action alerts, we have that too. And so if you go, again, Google Renters United Maryland or come bug me for one of these sheets, I'll be happy to talk more. Thanks.
It's on. Yes, I'm on. Okay. So thank you so much for that, Matt. Before we bring up Delegate Mireku-North, I just want to say, in terms of evictions, people say to me all the time, oh, nobody would evict a family with children. Would they? Nobody would do that. Well, guess what? Children are the most likely demographic. Under 5. Children under 5 are the most likely demographic to be evicted in our country. Generally, with households headed by Black and brown women. There is a huge racial component, of course, but kids too, at least 5 times more likely to be evicted than others. Next largest group, 5 to 9-year-olds. It's not good. Delegate, we would love to hear from you with tidbits, and you can share your success also from last session, which I think was really exciting.
Sure. So I'm Delegate Bernice Mireku-North. I hail from Montgomery County, District 14, which is part of Silver Spring, cuts through Olney, Damascus, Clarksburg, Germantown, those edges of those cities, but we're all in between. And so we have a variety of socioeconomic communities. We have the ones that are first-generation immigrants that are just struggling to get by. We have 2 community schools in our district as we speak. I'm sorry, 3. I just saw the list this morning. And then we have people who have quite a bit of wealth. And so I'm honored just to be with all of you today and discussing affordable housing is one of the reasons why I sought this position. Affordable housing as well as habitable housing was something I really thought was important to do at Annapolis. Now, I serve on the Ways and Means Committee, so we do a lot of revenue issues, but again, affordable housing, habitable housing was part of my agenda, and so one of the bills I did pass, and I'm looking to expand on it hopefully next session, is dealing with mental health and leasing issues when you're suffering from mental health. So as of October 1st, if you have a deteriorating mental health condition, you can break your lease early and be liable for up to 2 months of rent, as long as you have a doctor's note and a psychiatrist's note. We're hoping to expand that possibly to social workers, so look for that. We're still having conversations as to what that looks like. If not this session, then hopefully the following session, but it is coming up. But yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about, and I apologize for my voice, this is like the morning where I decided to give out, because some of you know I can talk a lot, a lot more clear than this, so I'm gonna do my best to be clear. I wanted to talk to you all about the response to Supreme Court decision that basically said it's okay to criminalize homelessness. This past session successfully passed out of the House a bill banning municipalities' ability to criminalize homelessness in anticipation of what I thought was probably going to happen in the Supreme Court. It didn't make it out of the Senate, and then the Supreme Court made their decision. And so the Attorney General's office has been a great partner in not only supporting that bill, but expanding it. And so we're looking to introduce a bill next session. It basically says that cities, localities cannot criminalize homelessness if they're just doing essential work, like sleeping, eating, things of that nature in public spaces. And that can't happen if there's no affordable housing alternative for them. And so it follows an Alabama law, which, if Alabama can do it, so can Maryland. And it will go into, hopefully it will go into effect, within the year after it passes, and I'm currently working with Senator Anthony Muse on the Senate side to introduce that. So look for that in this, I say in the spring, but in the next session in the winter, because we are very excited to introduce that piece of legislation. In terms of what's also coming down the pike, I talked to a few of my colleagues, and one of the bills that's going to come back again is the Just Cause bill, introduced by Delegate Janelle Wilkins, who has just been a superior champion for this. And the bill that passed out of the House last session allows counties the ability, if you have landlords that have 6 or more rental units, to make sure that people are not kicking tenants out without just cause. And there's several particular reasons that are listed in the piece of legislation that counties have to use to warrant a just cause eviction. And it didn't make it out of the Senate last year, but we are anxiously waiting for the day to come where it's going to pass, and I feel confident it will. I just probably want to thank, even though she's not here, Delegate Wilkins for her longstanding commitment to that bill. Another bill that is going to most likely be reintroduced. I just spoke to a delegate this morning about this. Delegate Adrian Bawafo. This is banning the box in rental applications. He is going to tweak it to make it look more like New Jersey, where basically you cannot ask for criminal history if you're applying, if you're seeking applications for rental housing, but you can ask for it if it's a conditional offer, and there's still some protections for the potential tenant in those circumstances. The New Jersey bill, I'm going off of that because he says it's going to be mostly like the New Jersey bill. Will list a number of crimes that no one can ask about. List a number of circumstances that no one can ask about, particularly cases that are expunged, cases that were charged and dismissed, and that like. So definitely look forward to supporting him on that bill, because that is definitely coming back in Annapolis next year. And another bill that Delegate Jen Terrassa from Howard County will be introducing, from my understanding, is a bill that basically says that there should be a 14-day gap between the notice of being evicted and the actual repossession of the housing for the sheriff. And the sheriff has to receive the appropriate documentation from the landlord before even going forward with the eviction. And that's something that, again, I'm happy to support my colleague from Howard County on, and that's going to be another bill that is coming down the pike. So yeah, in addition to the AG bill that I mentioned, we're going to try to morph what I passed in the House with the municipality bill into the AG bill and hopefully make that a success. I have a good feeling about it. I've talked to some folks in leadership already, so fingers crossed we can get it done next year. So yeah, that's essentially the cliff notes of what's going to happen. But as I'm sure if some of you already have experience. I'm looking at Matt because I know you're in the trenches, and my colleagues here, that bills always morph into something different about a few weeks later. But the goal is the same, to make sure, especially with renters, that their rights are protected. Because as you mentioned, and you hit the nail on the head, you can't build your way out of affordable housing. You have to work with the housing you got and treat our tenants with dignity. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all of that information, and we'll be checking in with you to get the inside scoop as the session moves on. And Alice, next up, as I said, housing is having a minute on the big scale and on the small scale. Tell us a little bit about what you're seeing.
Yeah, housing is having a minute, and actually, it probably has been having a minute. We just haven't been talking about it, which is a really big mistake, and that's sort of what I'm going to focus on here, which is how we talk about housing and why we should be talking about housing all the time. So a lot of people might not know this, but housing is actually one of the biggest issues that voters care about right now. It actually, in a lot of swing states, housing, we hear about the economy, but housing specifically is a bigger issue, the number one issue above reproductive rights. Yet we hear a lot more about reproductive rights and other issues, and not to mean that they aren't important, but you wouldn't know that housing is the number one issue for many voters in swing states right now. And so I'm going to talk about what we do know. And so we have a lot of research, lots and lots of research, from polling to message testing, that tells us that people care about the economy. We always hear messaging about the economy. The economy is important in our elections. But if you actually drill down to that and you try and figure out what it is that people care about inside that economy piece, it's housing. It's central. So that's why I say it's not the economy, it is housing that we really want to talk about. And so, I can't emphasize enough just how much data and research we have that tells us people really care about housing. We also have some very recent polling. This just came out last month that focuses on Maryland, and this was put out by UMBC. And it shows that economic conditions were the number one issue. So out of a whole list of things that they were given, economic issues are at the top. And within that, so we have food and consumer goods, but then cost and availability of housing right there, number two issue. And yet, we don't see this playing out in the media or in the things that we tend to hear most of our elected officials talking about, but it is a very, very important issue. And then if you also dig in a bit on that cost and availability of housing, look at the fact that 58% that said they're very concerned. So we don't often see such a big gap between somewhat and very. And then if you look at people who aren't concerned, like, those are tiny numbers, right? So it tells us that a majority of people are very concerned about the cost and affordability of housing. I also want to point out that this is an issue that is particularly important to Black voters, and that the cost of living, housing costs specifically, are the number one issue for Black voters. It's also really important. We have a lot of data and research here that shows that these voters also expect and want to see their elected officials talking about this issue. I also highlight this because we know that 50% of Black voters, this is a national number, are renters. So it's also really important that we are talking about these issues, and we frame it in terms of rights. Housing is a right, and we want to make sure that we are talking about this in a rights framework and connecting with voters here, because we know that Black voters in particular have a very high sense of shared experiences, And we also know that there are very legitimate reasons for them having extreme levels of mistrust in institutions and strong disillusionment with politics. And so in housing in particular, where we know that we need to address historic and systemic racial disparities, it's also very, very important that we engage with these groups in the conversation, that we're not just focusing on who we think are barriers or folks that we think that we need to win over on our side. We really need to be directly talking to the communities that are most impacted and engage with them and see that we also need to earn their support instead of just assuming that they are going to support housing policies. Also, the economy is not a partisan issue. A lot of people have ideas about who they think which political party might be the best on the economy. But when we dig into that and we look at how voters view different parties and like what they're most drawn to in terms of having conversations about the economy, Democrats generally are more trusted to talk about how economic policies directly impact people's lives. Republicans are generally more trusted around issues of job creation. But no one really owns the messaging around the economy. What we also know from lots of testing, polling, not just recently, but going back a couple of years, is that people really engage with what we think of as traditionally progressive economic policies. So the idea of talking about the wealth gap and people paying their fair share, this resonates at really high levels, like 65%, 70% support for these types of message frameworks. And so when we want to talk about housing issues, it's okay to talk about why some of these conditions exist. And it's okay to sort of sometimes name a bad guy and talk about like how rents can be jacked up because of corporate landlords. Like, this resonates with people. It is successful. You don't need to shy away from it. And so, as we think about like how we're talking about the issue, we always want to encourage people, be specific. Don't be afraid of being specific. And when we're general, we don't win anyone over. We're not persuading anyone. If we're just talking about growing the economy, well, what does that mean? That's going to mean something different to pretty much everyone that you talk to. And just talking about the economy in very general terms. We want to make it, we want to connect with them, right? We want to make it feel personal to them and be specific about what it is that we're talking about. And then there's a lot that's here. I have these slides available for you all so you can take a better look around just sort of like general do's and don'ts. A couple of things that I do want to highlight here. I can't say this enough. Do not repeat opposition talking points. You never need to repeat the opposition in order to justify what you're doing or to make your case. We always want to frame it. You control what your message is. And if you are repeating the opposition's talking points, you're just giving them free airtime, right? So always talk about your thing first. And we want to talk about it in terms of values, right? We want to connect with people always. What is the value that we're talking about? Let's relate to each other because we have the shared value. Housing is a human right. That's a shared value. That's a great place to start. We're connecting with people when we talk about it that way. I also really want to emphasize, while everyone here, I know folks like Matt, you're great experts, policy experts, but we also have to work really hard to make sure that we're talking about the issues in a way that everyone can understand. And we always have to think about, we don't want to use acronyms, jargon, like how can you make the messaging, plain language? Remember that the average American reads at a 7th grade level. So we have to talk about these things and use the words that we use really, really matter. And so, a couple of ideas. This is very specific to housing. And there, you can at least look, we have a presidential candidate who's using a lot of these framings in their messaging. It's really the first time that we are seeing this come up, but there are a couple of themes that we have seen really high success rates with and that we are seeing get used in a way that's really resonating with people. Prices are still too high. And that's a great one to talk about because we do want to, especially when we're talking about housing, economic development is a part of housing policy. We don't want to disparage the economy and make it sound like the economy is bad in order to talk about the needs for housing, but we also need to acknowledge that many, many people can't afford housing. So how do we, put those two together? Prices are still too high. The economy can be great, but prices can still be too high. And so, that can tie to things like down payment assistance, and it allows you to, again, keep that really positive focus. The system is rigged. People really like this. They really understand this. It's a way of sort of a fast forward of there are a lot of complicated things that got us to where we are. But it resonates for people to just acknowledge, like, the system's rigged. It doesn't work for everyone. It hasn't been set up to work for everyone. That is why we are experiencing the problems that we are now. It also helps us very quickly and easily to say, hey, this is a really complicated problem, which means that we probably need to kind of overhaul some systems. Why? Because the system's rigged. It also is validating. It helps people to say, like, yeah, it feels unfair to me. This feels unfair. And so we are acknowledging how people are feeling. And then again, when we go back to those values and the types of things that we want to connect it to, we want to talk about community schools. Everyone deserves the tools that they need to thrive. And this ties to the next one, everyone deserves a fair chance. And so this is to say, like, these aren't just handouts to people. These are tools. This is what's going to help people be successful. We know that spending money here, making these investments actually saves us money down the road. So, we want to bring this around to what the positive is. Everyone deserves a fair chance. Everyone should have a future where they have access to safe, affordable housing. And then, again, I have these slides online for you, but I did go ahead and just sort of draft out some examples of specific messaging that you can really drop in, XYZ housing plan. What's the thing that you're trying to do? You can say, this thing we're trying to do, it's not just about today, it's about our children's future. And then there's a place for details. And then you want to wrap it back up with the value. Every family has the tools that they need to thrive. And so you can see this structure of values at the front, small detail in the middle, and then wrap it up again with the value, the connection that you're trying to make to the people that you're talking about. So all of this is to say that you all are experts in this issue area. You know what we need to do. We also have significant need, and we know that the public wants to see action on these issues. But we actually have a real trifecta here that we don't get a lot of opportunity to have, which is this is an easy issue to talk about, right? So if it's an issue that we know how to talk about, we know that people want to see their elected officials taking action and talking about it, and there's a real need, then it means we should be doing the most that we absolutely can. This is a winning issue. We just need to go out and tell folks. Let's tell our elected officials, tell everybody who's in charge, like, this is a winning issue for you to talk about. It's going to help you to be public in taking leadership positions on these issues and making sure that they know how to talk about it, right? So we can help them say, hey, here is how you can talk about this in your public messaging. And there's lots of polling and data that shows that people want to hear you talking about this and taking action. And that is what's going to help us get things done in our county governments, in our city governments, and here at the state level.
Thank you. Wow. Wow. So Alice has taken us to school, and given us some deliverables. Just drop in. That is something that everyone can use. Some cut and paste right into your positions and your advocacy pieces. Hugely helpful at the state and federal level and local. And speaking of local, Dr. Hanifin Bonner is with Arundel Connecting Together. They are branded. Even you heard the county executive talking about this group showing up in their T-shirts. They do, and they are noticed. And so, Dr. Hanifin Bonner, tell us about what's going on locally and what you are seeing that works.
Well, is this on? Yeah. Okay. Alice, that was amazing. And all of you. So ACT stands for Anne Arundel Connecting Together. And we're what is called a People's Power Organization because we work across race, socioeconomic backgrounds, faith, and geography. And we focus on issues of justice for low and moderate income communities and families here in Anne Arundel County. We're rooted in 18 multi-faith congregations throughout Anne Arundel County. And if we put all our membership together, the last total we had was close to 24,000 people. That's a lot. Our work is at the grassroots level, and we're growing. And what we do is we train and develop leaders to act and win on the issues that are most important to all of us. At the heart of our work is the listening sessions, holding house meetings, building relationships and trust across cultural differences, and we look for the solutions to the problems that we're facing. ACT's model consists of 4 components. When we begin working, we do listening sessions, we do research, we take action, and then we come back and we reflect how well we did on things. Over the past couple of years, we've been heavily engaged in the housing work. We went out and we did listening sessions with our core members, our core teams from each of our congregations and organizations. We listened to close to 1,800 people throughout Anne Arundel County to find out what it was that was keeping them awake at night. Number 1 was housing. 2nd was mental health for youth. Number 3 was gun violence and hate issues. And number 4, forgot that one. It'll come back to me. Education, I'm sorry. Because, but we ended up combining education, that's why it slipped. We ended up combining education for the teachers and the mental health with youth because there was a correlation between the mental health issues that both teachers and students were facing throughout the county. So after we heard these sessions and we prioritized these topics, then the formed action teams. I was fortunate enough to become co-chair of the Attainable Action Team. And we particularly named it Attainable Action because affordable housing is good, but we've got to be able to attain it. And we've got to be able to get across the barriers. And so what we did in our research was looking at the barriers both with owning homes and renting homes. The thing that we do most when we go out and do the listening sessions with people is that and our research work is we begin to develop the leaders within the communities, and we start working within the communities because these are the people who are most closely impacted by the issues that they're facing with housing, homelessness. One of the organizations that we supported a few years ago to obtain funding was called Turnaround Thursday. And Turnaround Thursday is a movement, not a program, but it is a movement in which returning citizens have an opportunity to get a second chance in a job and an employment, living, and most of all, housing. One of the biggest issues that they face that we learned was around housing, particularly in getting rental housing, because of the stigmas and the barriers within the forms in which they had to apply for. One of the other issues that we became involved with a few years ago was with residents in Woodside Gardens, where it's a publicly subsidized complex where the tenants were experiencing mold, deterioration of their units, appliances breaking down, playground being fenced in because it was unsafe, and the owners and landlords refusing to acknowledge that these issues existed. For 2 years, we worked with the community leaders, and it was challenging for them because they were afraid. They were afraid to speak out, that they would be retaliated against, they would be thrown out and not have a place to live. So with the support of the community, they built a strong community organization within Woodside Gardens. The result was the landlords backed down, brought in about over $1 million, and have done a major renovation of the whole complex. Dominique Scurry, one of the community leaders, is a true champion in taking the lead in doing this. One of the other things that we were involved in was getting the policy officials at the Board of Education to change their minds about shortening the time frame in which they would begin testing for lead in schools. It was originally 3 years. We said that wasn't good enough. It needed to come back to 1 year. And we brought in community residents from the different neighborhoods, particularly in the lower economic neighborhoods, that said, we need to have greater attention paid to these older schools in the poverty areas that need to have attention for safe drinking water for the children's health. And it was changed. We also worked with our community partners to ensure that the fair housing legislation was passed years ago. So we do a lot of our work this past few years around housing with education sessions, working with the community leaders, and particularly we've been joining forces with our sister organizations in Howard County and Montgomery County, which is AIM and PATH. During the 24 legislative session, this alliance worked aggressively to support the rental and the tenant legislation that was within the legislature, and particularly the housing package. We also strongly supported the good cause legislation, knowing that it's not going to, that it didn't get there, but we will be back. And as I said to Matt, we will be back again supporting this group again. We currently have teams out doing listening sessions right now, not only with tenants, but also with landlords. Because I had a discussion with a landlord who said, you don't know what I face. And I said, well, tell me what you face, and let's listen to that. So there are two parts to this that we need to hear so that we can ensure it's a win-win for everyone. So in closing, I would like to invite you all on November 17th, 3 o'clock in the afternoon at Wild Community Center in Columbia, and there are flyers out on the table. We will have an action session between 3 and 5 p.m. where we will have Secretary Day, Secretary Brooke Lehman attending, plus a number of our state and Senate delegates to talk about the housing issues for the 2025 legislation. We anticipate between 500 and 600 people, and we're hoping that we will have an overflow crowd. As we said, we do bring out people, and we do make a difference, and thank you.
Thank you so much. And thank you for all that ACT does in our community. It's incredibly helpful and successful. And Pam is inching her way over here. Very quickly, I do want to say two things that are at least to watch for coming up in this legislative session. Just cause evictions, what that will do in a nutshell is prevent landlords from, at the end of a lease, saying, I don't want you here anymore. I want to be able to bring somebody else in with no reason, no legitimate reason, no real reason for doing that. And there, of course, would be some escape hatches. So people would not be stuck with their tenants forever. There would be ways out of that. And then the other bill that will be coming back is called the Tenant Possessions Recovery Act. I think that's TPRA, which would require notification of the eviction date and give tenants some time within which to reclaim their property very, very quickly. Anne Arundel County has the fastest, by far, eviction process. We are the only jurisdiction in the entire state that actually follows the law that requires that there are only 5 days from the time that landlord files a failure to pay rent case until that case is heard. 5 days. People are not getting notice. It goes in the mail and then it gets tapped on the door or on the outside, more likely, of an apartment complex. It's very fast. Tenants often do not get notice that they're being sued for failure to pay rent. And then our sheriffs are extremely efficient as well. They try their best to be as humane as possible and notify people of the dates in advance. They're not required to do that by law. They try to. It doesn't always happen. So oftentimes people come home, their stuff's on the street. Their kids' stuff is on the street. I know Julie Hummer was here earlier, and she has testified the last couple of years in favor of legislation to require notice and a reclamation period. It's incredibly compelling legislation. So we will look for support on both of those. And thank you, Pam, for your indulgence. And thank you to all of our panelists.
I just want to recognize Joe Tulin, who is actually departing from Annapolis Pride, particularly because LGBTQ youth are twice as likely to experience homelessness related to other youth. That's to do with gender, it's to do with lack of support, it's to do with lack of family support. So thanks for being here, Joe. We appreciate you. Oh, very exciting panel. I've been looking forward to this one. And my friend, Jonathon Rondeau, who's the CEO of the ARC. I hope I'm on the right one. Yes, I am. This is panel 4. This is nonprofits and mission-driven developers partnering together to solve the housing crisis. So Cliff Martin, my personal hero, is going to be the moderator of this panel. Thank you, guys. Appreciate you.
Good afternoon, everyone. As the last panel, I hope you're all still really psyched up and you've got that sugar and those carbs going for the most dynamic panel of the day. Once again, thank you. I'm Cliff Martin. I have recently retired from the Housing Commission of Anne Arundel County as their CEO. Thank you. Hold. No, I recently retired after 30-plus years serving there and many years before that dealing with affordable housing. Well, if you didn't get the message, there's a housing crisis, folks. Right? And so we say it, but I really mean it. One of the blessings that I've had since retirement and going to work as a consultant is to travel around the United States working with developers, housing authorities, and agencies about what's going on in their area. And it is tragic, to say the least. The conditions that exist in most of the country with affordable housing are a clear indication, unfortunately, and this is in my humble opinion, so you can keep it off the record, is that our good friends at Housing and Urban Development have been asleep at the wheel for a very long time. I'm excited that there's discussion. I get a couple of claps back there. I am excited that there's discussions about affordable housing that's going on around our election right now. But in my 30-plus years of the industry and working with Housing and Urban Development in Congress, I would not be surprised if a week from now it goes back into the spiderweb-filled little closet that it has been in for a very long time. And even if it does, there's still a part of me that's very worried that As a person who administered the public housing program, the Housing Choice Voucher Program, the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, the Veterans Affairs Self-Help Program, and everything else that came out of the federal government, it'll be burdened with regulations, it'll be paperwork intensive, and it will drive all of us absolutely insane to try to administer. So Cliff, why in the hell are you talking about this right now? Because that means, just as it has been over the last few decades, that the creative energy, the good ideas, the insightfulness and the thoughtfulness will need to come locally. And that is why we have this remarkable, creative, insightful, fantastic panel. Because once again, if you want the rubber to hit the road, if you want the doors to be kicked down, and if you want to make a difference, you really need to do it in your own backyard with your own talent and with your own team in your jurisdiction. And we've always had that here. And so let's move forward and let's talk about the crisis. So right now in Anne Arundel County, if you just look at some of the waiting lists for affordable housing, we're talking about 27 to 30,000 families. Let me repeat that. 27 to 30,000 families. That's not people. So what does that translate into people? Way more than we can handle, period. Folks, we haven't even scratched the surface. And while we do need to celebrate all of the things that we've done and all of the successes and the great ideas, man, we're just at the bottom of the mountain. And so we have to talk about innovative, creative, insightful, out-of-the-box ways to do more, to build more, to create more, and to preserve what we do have. Our folks here today are nonprofits and partners who do this every day, and we've asked them to come and share with you their thoughts, their ideas about how they will have been, let's say, have been achieving this goal and will be achieving this dream for the county and its constituents moving forward. So building and providing units is not the end of the road. Clients who move into affordable housing need a variety of other types of services and supports. Ancillary issues impact them. These are folks coming out of crisis and challenge, poverty, domestic violence, mental health issues. So putting them in an affordable housing unit is not the end of the road. It's just the beginning for many of them. And so we are going to talk about that with some of our service supporters here today. I'm hoping you'll find this insightful. And so that's why we've asked, and we have Dan McCarthy, the ex-executive director of Episcopal Housing. We have Dana Johnson, the CEO of Homes for America. We have Patrick Sheridan from Sheridan LLC, the principal there. Jonathon Rondeau from the Arc of the Chesapeake. He serves as their CEO. And Jason Papanikolas from AAWDC, the vice president there. And we are going to start with Dan. If we'll have Dan begin the conversation and turn it over for his thoughts and insight on what Episcopal Housing has been doing.
Thank you so much, Cliff, and thanks so much for having me here today. So, look, I think when we had the prep call for this, I think Cliff's at least directive to me was to bring some optimism, and that's what I'm going to do today. I am optimistic about where things are from my perspective on the development of affordable housing. So I want to tell you a little bit about EHC, and then I'm going to tell you why I'm optimistic. So Episcopal Housing Corporation, we're an independent 501c3. We were started about 30 years ago by Episcopalians who had a jealousy around what the Catholic Charities was doing. So jealousy can be a great motivating factor, and I sit here today because of that. So we do really three things. We act as real estate development consultants to social service agencies. Think people who are reunited foster families, who are helping people who are in recovery from substance abuse, who are providing services to people who have experienced trauma. So I get to work with people who are incredibly motivated and inspirational. That's what I get to interact with people who are solving the world's problems. I've been increasing my book of business with the Episcopal Diocese, who we don't have a formal relationship, but as many of you know, even if you don't go to church, the number of people attending services is going down, which creates an opportunity for churches to view their assets in a different way. There's a movement in this country, it's called Yes in God's Backyard. It's kind of an ancillary to the Yes in My Backyard. And it is, Montgomery County passed a law this year allowing churches to use their land by right for affordable housing. All right? I know there is interest in Anne Arundel County. We've talked to people in Howard County about it. It is going to be a way for us to invent land. I know we've talked a couple of times about how there's a shortage of land in the county. We're going to be able to invent sites as we kind of push this forward. Episcopal Housing Corporation has been very active, not just with Episcopal churches, with Lutheran churches and a number of other things. Through a crisis, you know, there's an expression, you should never let a good crisis go to waste. And we are doing our best to create opportunity from that crisis around the attendance at churches in our communities. The third thing we do is we're developers of affordable housing, and over the last 10 years, we have focused on the development of permanent supportive housing through a strategic relationship with a group called Healthcare for the Homeless. We're a federally qualified health center in Baltimore, and we have created a relationship where Episcopal Housing Corporation knows how to do the real estate development. Healthcare for the Homeless is learning that, but then they also provide both the health and the social workers in the buildings that we build. When we build buildings with HCH, we create spaces where they have usually two social workers in each 70 approximately unit building. And we're able to take care of the cost of that by the way we've been able to structure some of our projects. I will say that so I've been doing this for a long time, and I will say right now, I feel that the level of creativeness at the local level, you know, Ms. Breakstone here in Anne Arundel, Heather Sheridan in Baltimore County, Ernestina Simmons in Baltimore City, I'm feeling that there's some really great talent working on solving homelessness and people who have the vision and the capacity to make that happen. So from my perspective, that's a really positive thing. You know, people want to solve problems, and we've got some talented people working at the local level. The state of Maryland has created a division of homeless solutions, right? Now, you know, they're working to include permanent supportive housing in their next tax credit round, and I think that, you know, a lot of us have some questions about how that's going to happen, but at least they're thinking about ways to expand permanent supportive housing. And so, for those of you who don't know, permanent supportive housing is housing for people who have exited homelessness, and it's permanent housing. I often, when I tell people I develop permanent supportive housing for people who have exited homelessness, I often get the question, well, how long can they stay in that housing? It's permanent housing, right? And it has supportive services linked to that so people can maintain their housing stability. And we try to do it from an asset-based model where we build on the things that they're good at, and our social workers support the things that they need and support and allow them to move forward with the things that they're good at. We try not to have a deficiency-based model for the services that we deliver in those properties. So the state has this housing solution program and has a policy arm that is really very robust right now. And Scott Gottbrecht is really doing some great thinking about it. So we've got some good local minds, we've got some good movement at the state. I missed Secretary Day and the next panels, but I'm sure they talked about the housing bills that the governor has been advancing. Never, in my experience, has the Housing Department of the state of Maryland advanced legislation as part of the legislative session in the first 3 months of the year. We've always, the Housing Department has always been reactive. And Jake Day and his leadership, they're proactive to create more opportunities. That's a huge thing. I know Cliff talked about HUD, and this is, I know many years of scars working in the public housing sector. But I will tell you right now, HUD has introduced a new program called COC Bills, which provides both capital and, most importantly, operating expenses for permanent supportive housing. The application is due November 21st. And Episcopal Housing Corporation is going to be competing for it at the national level. And whether we win or not, the fact that HUD has been willing to kind of take the next step in supporting this, putting $175 million into it for this coming year, and I'm thrilled that HUD, who's been hidebound and often loves their rules more than they love their mission, is making a big breakthrough on homelessness, and I'm thrilled with that. So, a week from today, we're all going to vote, and it causes anxiety, right? We all know that the arc of history bends towards justice, but it most often isn't a smooth curve. We lived through 2016 to 2020. Many of us were active in the industry at that time, and we sit here today. In 2028, we'll sit here again. So I am optimistic that there's only so much that can be done to kind of move us off our path towards using housing to create justice. In my mind, you solve homelessness by building housing. Housing solves homelessness. And all the things that I've kind of run through quickly are things that are going to help us solve homelessness here in Maryland. Thank you.
And Dan, we're hoping for a project in Anne Arundel County.
Me too.
I've been waiting a long time for it, so fingers crossed, right? Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Dana Johnson, the CEO at Homes for America. Thanks, Dana.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. For those of you who don't know us, Homes for America is a nonprofit. We just celebrated our 30th anniversary. We're very excited to still be here after 30 years. We are a women-founded nonprofit headquartered in Annapolis, and we have developed over 80 communities throughout the Mid-Atlantic region, many of them here in our home state of Maryland. And we have 5 properties here in Anne Arundel County and another one in development. We are very much a mission-driven developer. Our mission is to create quality, service-enhanced, sustainable homes that provide opportunities for residents. So I had 3 topics I wanted to just touch on. One is the incredible challenges that many folks this morning have discussed in getting new units built. Interest rates, are now double what they were 2-3 years ago. Construction costs continue to climb, and that really makes it very challenging to have a balanced budget. I do agree that we need to start innovating in lots of ways, and I think one of the things we really need to start thinking about is our construction methods and our construction standards, because we cannot subsidize our way out of our problem of how much it costs to build new housing. I want to just continue to just thank the Pittman administration, and I want everyone in this room to understand how important that housing trust fund has been. There are many jurisdictions that are not seeing the pipeline that Anne Arundel County has, and it's, as you have higher costs and you can leverage less debt because interest rates are higher, you need more subsidy, and the county has really showed up, and you can see that other developers, not just folks like me who are headquartered here in Anne Arundel County, but other developers are coming into Anne Arundel County because they know that they can get their property financed. And ACDS is an amazing group, and we're very fortunate to have them here in Anne Arundel County working with developers like all of us, because it's not easy moving, these projects that have so many different layers of financing. It's really challenging work, and they do a great job. I do want to say, though, that one of the challenges here in Anne Arundel County is the time it takes to get from start to finish in the permitting process. And I think that, there are other counties that it's faster to go from, I have funding to build this project, but it's going to take me a very long time to get all the way to a building permit. And so I think there are some things that the county could explore of expediting, maybe even just for housing or affordable housing specifically, expediting that process so that, because time is money, and the longer you wait, the more your costs add up. So that's on the production side. On the preservation side, a lot of folks this morning, including the secretary, as well as Delegate Henson, talked about the challenges that we're having in preserving the affordable housing that we have. Obviously, we are never going to solve our housing crisis without building new units, but we're going to shoot ourselves in the foot if we lose units off the back end. And some of that happens with affordability restrictions expiring, and then, owners can sell and make a lot of money. That's, in my view, of course, one of the reasons why it's important to have nonprofits owning your housing, because we are not profit motivated, and our missions are to hold on and preserve these units in perpetuity. There was an article in the Washington Post a couple of weeks ago about the challenges, particularly acute in Washington, D.C., of affordable housing and owners that are not able to refinance their properties. They're having enormous operating deficits, and some of them are just getting out of the business altogether. And so you can lose units through expiration of covenants, but you can also lose them just because there's not enough money to keep them up. And I know everyone in this room knows the importance of quality in your housing stock. And I'll just give you some numbers from our portfolio. Our operating expenses of our properties, these are things like utilities, taxes, staffing costs, increased 9% last fiscal year. And as a mission owner, we are only increasing rents somewhere between 3% and 5%. So you can see that the math doesn't work very well. And particularly on smaller properties, aging properties where your repairs and maintenance costs are going up, it's very challenging to break even. And that means that owners in many cases are having to put cash into the properties to pay the bills. The cost of insurance, which I know probably everyone in this room has heard about, we're averaging for the last 3 years 15% every year increases in our insurance, and we feel lucky. Like there are groups around the country that are seeing 30% increases in their insurance costs each year. And that's not a problem that's abating anytime soon, given all of the climate disasters that we're experiencing. So all of these things, make it really challenging for the owners to maintain their properties. And I think we touched on it, Matt touched on it a little bit earlier, but I feel like it's important for the good guy owners. There's lots of bad actors out there, but I think folks like the folks on this panel and others that are really trying to do the right thing, and the tenant advocates can come together on a lot of things that including boosting housing supply, but also funding for preservation. The Delegate Henson had a bill last year or 2 years ago that would boost funding for repairs, capital repairs for properties. So when you have a small project and you need to replace your roof, it's really challenging to find money for that. So I think there are ways that we can all work together to agree on a shared preservation strategy. So the last thing I want to just talk about is resident services, and that's one of the things that gets challenged when the operating budget is very stressed. But we our preference, if we had all the money in the world, would be to have resident service staff at all of our properties. Unfortunately, we can't afford it everywhere. But there's a lot of research showing how important that staff is to supporting residents with housing stability. They have improved health outcomes, improved educational outcomes. But we don't fund resident services the way, given how impactful they are, we don't fund resident services the way they should be funded. We struggle with the state of Maryland about including those funds in the operating budget. And funders are great, but they lose interest over time. So it's hard to have sustained funding for these programs. And I'm just going to give you an example of one of our properties here in Annapolis. It's called Bay Forest Apartments, and it serves seniors. And we got a grant from the Tomei Foundation to provide a full-time resident service coordinator and a community health nurse, and through a partnership we created with Luminous Health here in Annapolis. And I have some great data. We just finished our 2-year with the program, and these folks worked with all of the seniors, assisting them, referring them to resources, bringing on-site programming, and helping folks manage chronic conditions. And I'll give you some statistics. 81% of residents reported fewer ER or hospital visits. 84% of residents reported a reduction in isolation and loneliness, which among seniors has been a huge problem coming out of COVID. 78% reported improved food security due to an on-site food pantry and community meals. 61% of residents reported having learned strategies to improve their mental health. And these data are amazing, but the stories of the individual residents and the impacts that they had, we had some people come, had the nurse, they met with the nurse, they were immediately sent to the emergency room because they had existing unmitigated conditions. And we had a blind resident that learned how to do medication management. She worked with the nurse to figure out a strategy that would help her keep on her medicine and stay on it. And folks that came back from the ER and had on-site help learning how to manage their chronic conditions. So it's a little bit of money in the grand scheme of things when you think about the kind of impact it has. But now the grant ran out, and so we're trying to figure out how to fund that partnership with Luminous and our resident service coordinator to keep it going, because it's been incredibly impactful. So I think resident services is often something that a lot of us care about, but it's really often missed in the conversation about funding gaps. That's it.
Thank you, Dana. I wanted to circle back to something. Go ahead, please give. I wanted to just circle back to something Dana mentioned, and we can't showcase this enough. In my history here in the county, which goes back quite a ways, serving under administrations, I served under 9 different county executives, and I served under that many different county councils. And we are at such an amazing moment with this current administration and this current council. And one thing I learned from Stephen Sondheim in the musical Into the Woods, opportunity is not a lengthy visitor. And we don't know how long this opportunity will last. So we've got to get a lot in, because who knows what will come beyond this. And let me tell you, if you think back, we've gone Republican, Democrat, right? Okay, so, what I'm saying is act now, right? Okay. So much for my anecdotes. Okay, so next I'd like to ask Jonathon Rondeau if he would share information with you. Jonathon, once again, is the CEO of the Arc of the Chesapeake, and they've been doing amazing things. So, Jonathon, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. And so I'm going to take a minute to just talk about who the Arc is and why housing, and why is that important. So the Arc Central Chesapeake region was founded as the Arc Anne Arundel County. Today we serve Anne Arundel County and Maryland's Eastern Shore, touching the lives of about 4,000 people with disabilities and about 150 tenants across that region. but we were founded by a group of parents who envisioned a different life in the late 50s, early 60s for their children with disabilities. So just a brief history lesson. At that time, pediatricians still told parents in Anne Arundel County to send their kids to an institution. They were a burden. It doesn't seem like that would be possible, but that was happening. And there in Anne Arundel County, kids with disabilities often didn't go to school. And so there wasn't much to do during the day. And so our founders felt that that should be different. But what they did, something unique compared to other providers that were started at the time, was they didn't want to start services right away. What they envisioned was that those services and that equity would be embedded in the community that they are. And for the first 15 years, they worked really hard at that, discovered that wasn't happening, so we're going to create the change we want to see. And so that's how today the ARC sort of exists. But the first program that we created was a housing program for people with disabilities so that they didn't have to live in an institution. And we still own that unit today. It's a duplex in Linthicum, and it was just actually renovated with all private dollars, and that's a different story at the end. But about 15 years ago, we paused to say, well, we're doing all this incredible work, and we're building this incredible work for people with disabilities, but we were founded to create equitable, inclusive communities. And if we're just creating housing opportunities for people with disabilities, we're sort of missing the mark. How are we doing that? And so our housing subsidiary, Chesapeake Neighbors, was created with a vision to provide quality, affordable housing for all as a way to move beyond the ARC's mission, but to how do we are getting towards our vision of creating equitable and inclusive and sustainable communities. And so today, we really look at small scale, so small or scattered site development that has a mix of market and affordable housing happening at the same location, people with disabilities or other needs, living with people who just need access to quality housing, all at the same time. And part of the reason for that is led with that sort of mission and vision, but the other is the mechanics of that. The majority of our housing development gets zero government dollars. The way that we subsidize the reduced rent for people at 30% AMI, 50% AMI, is the market rate rent that the other units are paying. So we have about a 25 to 30% affordability and about a 70 to 75% market rate, and that's what's paying those subsidies. In Anne Arundel County, we do get vouchers for people with disabilities to do that, not for all of the housing developments. With the Housing Trust Fund, we have 2 scattered site developments with the support of ACDS that will be subsidized as part of that. But those are just 2 of the 7 pipeline projects that we have in Anne Arundel County and the Eastern Shore that don't have that. And so I think we talked about inspiration or optimism. The optimism is that we are working with sort of banking partners, foundations, lobbying a little bit or advocating a little bit with the Secretary Day and his team to really think about how you can create a different model in addition to tax credit deals to be able to fund and sustain that, right? And so one of the criticisms we often get when I'm talking about our projects is, well, you're not creating enough affordable housing. But my answer is my affordable housing is sustainable because I'm not necessarily getting government dollars. And so I can move faster. I can create those units in 18 months from start to finish. In fact, we created 9 affordable housing units from when we purchased the land to when they're opening with the ribbon cutting on November 7th. It was 3.5 years. Around that. We have another project that's in less than a year, 3 units will be created. And so a lot of infill focused in on that. And I think I look at it as an and proposition, right? The bigger tax credit deals need to happen, but I think there needs to be this focus on sort of innovation and how can we do things differently. And I'm not saying it's easy, and I will take government money, so don't anyone walk out of here thinking that's what I'm saying. But we are focused on figuring out how to do it despite the need for that, and not saying, hey, we can't sort of walk away with that. I will acknowledge, due to the scale, the size the ARC is, allows us to be able to do it. So for the last 5 years, We are sharing services. So I already have a sophisticated finance team. I have general counsel. I have an HR team that can do that work. Smaller developers would never, if they were just their core mission was just to do housing, would never be able to do that. And so we are incredibly lucky, and our board has been incredibly supportive of looking at how do we make sure we do our core mission for people with disabilities, but how do we look at this sort of broader piece. The last thing I would sort of say is I would encourage everyone to sort of think about smaller scattered site development and really thinking about that as part of the package deal of when we talk about housing. Because when we, particularly in Anne Arundel County, when we're talking about sort of infill or available land, some of this work is able to be done by laws that the county council and county executive have passed, but also the housing bill that the secretary and governor got passed that allows us as a nonprofit that owns land to increase by right the number of units that we can have in areas that the county traditionally had not allowed that to be able to do. But part of that conversation is allowing for that. And then the other part of that conversation is how do we go back to some of those dedicated funding sources like home dollars that in the late 90s, early 2000s, were going to small scattered site developments, but over the last 5 to 10 years have been used to supplement tax credit deals, which I understand why that needs to be, but can there be just sort of diversity in that? So that way more organizations like the ARC or other faith-based organizations or other smaller organizations that just want to do this, want to create 2 units or 10 units over here, have the same access to those resources to create them for their community. So thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think the last point that you made, which is about the needs for the clientele and or our low-income citizens that you need, sound like they could be a greater topic for discussion for like the consolidated plan in the county. And so those are some good ideas. And I guess we'll let Aaron tick that away for the future. So, right. Oh, that's true. That's true. Thank you. Next, we're going to hear from Patrick Sheridan, the principal at Sheridan LLC, and so I'll turn it over to Patrick.
Thank you, Cliff. Couple things on need, I guess, before I kind of go into some examples that could be usable by the group and actually wraps up a lot of the different topics that people have talked about so far, is that, the housing need is not just local, it's not even just national. The Washington Post on October 13th had an article about how 12,000 people turned out to protest in Madrid about the need for affordable housing and accessible housing. So it's worldwide, quite frankly. So it's a huge issue that needs to be solved somehow. The Washington Post actually had a couple good articles recently. Certainly one Dana mentioned, but one was on Sunday, I think it was. It talked about the metropolitan areas in the country that have seen the largest rent increases over the course of the last year. Washington, D.C. was number 1, the metro area. Baltimore was number 4, which kind of surprised me somewhat. But it just goes to show that, we're in an area that has seen some of the most drastic rent increases of any place. And I think that, recently Dana had an event celebrating the 30th anniversary of Homes for America and had a speaker there, Jerusalem Demsis, who is a staff writer for the Atlantic magazine and also happens to reside in Montgomery County. So there's some very interesting information that she put out. One of them is that, without getting too political, the blue states, if you will, which tend to be more liberal and have been more creative, I think, on things related to land use and zoning and inclusiveness as far as adding accessible units and affordable units and market rate properties, have actually seen a decrease in the amount of property or amount of units that can be built versus red states. And it tends to be more about regulations and things like that that actually have decreased housing supply as opposed to increasing it. And I think it gets down to the point that what we need to be looking at, what we're doing on a statewide, countywide, citywide basis is the hyper-locality of what land use planning tends to be, whether it's zoning, housing design, parking requirements, things along those lines, and the number of veto points that we put into the process of developing an affordable housing property as a result of all of those. So we run into situations where the greater need gets lost in the fact that someone at a local level that is going to be impacted by an affordable housing project being built could have more veto power over that than the people that actually need the housing, because they have an opportunity to be able to be heard and to show up at the council meetings and things like that, whereas the people that actually would use the housing tend not to be able to access those meetings because of work and children and things along those lines. So I think that we kind of keep that in mind as we look at what opportunities we have as an industry, if you will, and government and citizens to see what we can do to try to reduce the barriers so we can get more housing built. Again, along the same lines of what Dana mentioned too. My history's like Cliff's. I retired a few years ago, and I had been focused more on regional, statewide, and national housing issues. My last job was running the housing programs for Volunteers of America, which is a national faith-based nonprofit. We had over 400 properties in 42 states and Puerto Rico. And it gave me an opportunity to see how things are done in a lot of different areas. One of the things I'm going to talk about wraps up supportive housing and small properties and also alternative building techniques, and it's something that we did as an organization in partnership with Wells Fargo Foundation. Volunteers America has long history of working with veterans, and while I was there, we did something like 5 or 6 different permanent supportive housing projects for vets. These were 50 to 80 unit tax credit properties that had full wraparound services for the vets, also had either Veteran Administration supportive housing, VASH vouchers, or else had project-based Section 8 vouchers attached to them. And we had good success with them, quite frankly. But again, you're dependent on tax credits, you're dependent on finding properties that are large enough to build those size properties. And what we worked out with Wells Fargo was, number one, how could we do the hardest thing possible? But what it was to do permanent supportive housing for vets that would be alternative building techniques and done as accessory dwelling units in 4 different metropolitan areas. And kind of those keys there is it had to be a place where Wells Fargo had banks, and the other foundation we worked with is Home Depot Foundation, so again, we needed some connection with them. But it also had to be where Volunteers of America had a local presence, and we have different affiliates around the country that does supportive services for the vets and also have good local contacts. So what we looked for was what markets around the country had favorable accessory dwelling unit legislation already in place, which, given this was about 4 or 5 years ago, wasn't as many as there are now. The communities and also where we had, of course, the presence of an affiliate and Wells Fargo, we picked Minneapolis, St. Paul, Los Angeles, Durham, North Carolina, and Austin, Texas, all which had favorable rules that would allow us to do what we were trying to look for. The second thing we needed to look for was how would we accomplish this in those individual markets. Our main office based in Alexandria, Virginia, cannot necessarily helicopter into these markets and be able to successfully develop the property. So initially we thought of our local affiliates were going to be the ones that could give us the access that we needed, but it turned out we actually ended up partnering with local nonprofits in many of these communities to actually make it work. The other piece we're looking to is flexibility in building codes and ability of local government to consider alternative construction techniques for this to actually happen. So that was important, and again, these markets met that. And then the fourth piece, or fifth piece, I guess, was subsidies available. You know, if we were to do this, could we get a VASH voucher assigned to it? Could we get the Public Housing Authority to assign some project-based vouchers or something along those lines? What we ended up with, and we were successful, and part of the concept behind this whole thing was it would be a pilot and be an example for other organizations to possibly follow. What happened is it was different in every community, pretty much. Los Angeles was one that, because we had a very strong affiliate out there with a long history of working with the city and others, they actually were able to do it on their own without a local nonprofit. But that one was one where they actually got licensed to build modular housing, and they were able to do modular housing as an ADU on the backs of houses in different parts of the city. Saw some great pictures of them hoisting hoisting a modular housing piece over the other house to be able to drop it in the backyard. But that was one of the ways that happened. Again, in that situation, LA County had a number of unassigned VASH vouchers that they could put toward these properties. And again, particularly with VASH, you've got Veteran Administration support for the services, so that actually worked quite well. In Minneapolis is one place where we didn't have that type of local contact or ability to do it on our own. We partnered with a veterans organization up there that already had some expertise, and then partnered again with an architect that was designing and building tiny homes. And we were able to convince the city government to allow us to use this tiny home model on a number of different vacant lots that were available in Minneapolis. In Durham in North Carolina, different story. We work with the Durham Land Trust there and with Habitat for Humanity in North Carolina. And we used container housing. And it was actually very successful. Again, design is really what makes container housing work or not work. And we were able to build quite a few units there using the container housing, again, getting project-based Section 8 from the local housing authority. I want to mention on the container housing that was actually featured by the Smithsonian on the mall this past summer, the Durham project and with Volunteers America. And then the last one, Austin, was sort of right off the books as far as being different than everything else. We didn't end up doing ADUs or tiny homes, was motel conversion in that case. So totally different type of concept, but we were able to still do permanent supportive housing for vets and use some of these unused motels. So while it's not Anne Arundel County and not necessarily Maryland specific in this case, each one of these could be used as a model to be able to do something on a small scale locally and use creative housing.
Thank you. I think needs to be re-articulated if you haven't got the message. Putting together an affordable housing deal from start to finish is probably one of the most complex, difficult challenges you will ever face. And when the Housing Commission said, we're going to become a developer, I was all excited. I was like, this is going to be fun. We can do this, whatever. And then I realized after getting into it that if I was going to stay dedicated, I need to be a little bit medicated. And so if you're wondering why I'm as strange as I am, that's exactly why. So, thank you. Okay, next we are going to hear from Jason Papanikolas with Anne Arundel Workforce Development. He is the vice president there. They are supplementing a lot of the affordable housing communities, families, residents with some really innovative and exciting services. And I mentioned earlier that that is such an essential piece of the success of families that live in our affordable housing communities. You just can't give them a unit and call it a day. There's just so much more involved, and AAWDC really has stepped up to the plate. So Jason, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you. So I guess I don't build public housing units. I've been in public housing units. We actually had offices in two of Cliff's facilities. What I work on is sort of the demand side of the equation. If I can reduce the demand for affordable housing, it helps too. We work to get people to family-sustaining wages. What is a family-sustaining wage in Anne Arundel County? Any guesses? About $56,000 for a single individual. If you're a family of 5, $150,000. So we have a long way to go. But there's a few things I'm going to talk about today that will help the situation long term. The first one is that I don't know how many folks here know, but we now do career counseling from 6th grade until you retire. As part of the blueprint legislation, we have career counselors in every middle and high school in this county, which means we are starting to engage with students at a very young age and discuss opportunities and options for their career. And not just you need a job, but what type of job engages you? What type of job works for your situation and your circumstance? And we start building that plan when you're 10 or 11 years old. And we start working, we can even work with your family through the community schools initiatives, through our community programs. To not just help your student, but help you break that cycle of poverty, help you get out of affordable housing and free up a unit for someone else. We have a huge problem in this county, as I've learned today, and we'd like to help you in any way we can. So we definitely start young. We also have a lot of non-traditional ways of getting people into employment. One of the big issues that many of our folks have is they're not good at testing. They weren't good at schooling. Well, you don't need to be good at testing or good at schooling to be good on the job. One of the things that Anne Arundel Workforce Development can fund is what we call work and learn training. This is essentially an internship where we're the employer of record for up to 10 weeks so they can try the industry out, you can try them out. Hopefully we make a marriage and we'll move on. What happens at the end of that 10 weeks? Hopefully you're willing to take the person on permanently. But we do have another sort of incentive for you. If you get to the end of that 10 weeks and say, I love Johnny, it's great, he's missing 2 things. He doesn't know this one piece of software, and I need him to learn a piece of equipment. Guess what? You can also pay for on-the-job training, which is when you will take him on as an employee, I will reimburse you for 50 and 75% of his salary. I'm going to actually pay you for your time to train Johnny in that piece of equipment, train him for that certificate, and at the end of, again, another 10 weeks, so I've been working with you for 6 months at this point, you are employed by the company, and you have the skills necessary to succeed. We get to the end of that 20 weeks, well, Johnny still has 2 very big problems that a lot of folks in this county have. Besides housing, Johnny has a child that he needs to find childcare for. And Johnny doesn't have reliable transportation. After housing, childcare and transportation are the 2 biggest needs for folks in this county. We don't have a great public transit system, and I could probably go on for hours about the childcare system. We're actively working with the commission they've created to help address those situations. Well, guess what? My organization has what we call supportive service money, which is largely tied to you simply participating with us. We can cover the cost of childcare and transportation for a certain amount of time, not forever, but certainly at least until you're starting to make a solid paycheck, and we will help you put a plan into place, not only pay your rent, but get stable childcare, and hopefully get you reliable transportation. we've worked with, and because we don't just work with the residents of the county, we're also the bridge between the business community. We've worked with many businesses, say, hey, look, you have a workforce that has transportation challenges. Have you thought about maybe, I don't know, creating a van service? They can all get to the Cromwell Station light rail. They can't get any further. So we actually worked with Live Casino to set something like that up. They actually do pick them up from a couple of locations around the county and drive them into Live Casino, which has great family-sustaining jobs. And they've continued that even beyond our subsidy, because what they have discovered is that they retain more employees, which actually reduce their costs. So those are the three big ways we do it, but we also work with your employers. We'll work with you in any way, shape, and form, because you're one of the biggest barriers in this county is the unspoken barrier, the resume. The resume makes or breaks you. Because you have us on your side, you have somebody who will give you a great resume, who will work directly with you.
Great. Thank you, Jason. I am getting the illustrious signal from Pam that it is time to wrap up, and I will, to close this session out, I'm going to say something I say when I get to speak publicly around the country, as I get to do quite often. I will say this to many of you in the room. Please never forget the angels that you are, because a lot of people in this country will not do what you do. They don't have the constitution or the fortitude to step up and do what you do, so never forget what you are accomplishing every day. It is definitely work for the strongest of heart and the deepest of heart, and you change trajectories of people's lives every second. And please don't ever forget it. And I always want to acknowledge it and tell everyone how much we all appreciate each other and appreciate the work that you do. And as the last panel, we'll go ahead and close out for the next session. Thank you all so much.
Great panel. Thank you, Cliff. And thank you, Jason, for bringing up affordable transportation and childcare along with affordable housing. We've got to fix those things. So please don't go, guys, because we're at probably the most important part of the afternoon, which is when we hear from you. So as ACDS puts together their plan, they are really very, very interested in what you are experiencing and what you know, especially those of you who do the work, but all of you, in terms of how we move forward cooperatively and together. We've obviously heard a lot about collaboration today. Here's our opportunity. So with no more ado, I am going to bring Hannah Breakstone up to the stage, and she is going to tell us what happens next. Thank you, Hannah.
Oh, and I can see it right here. Hello, everyone. I'm Hannah Breakstone. I'm the COC Planner and Grants Manager at ACDS, which basically means that most things that have to do with homelessness and housing kind of fall under my purview. I get to work with Beth Brush, and we are all happy to work under Erin Karpowitz with her great leadership. So I'm going to do a very quick intro. We've heard a lot about what ACDS does, and these slides I think can be shared after for anyone who would like the information. But basically, like Pam said today, I obviously don't have a panel, so you all are my panel, and we're going to hear from you all today. So the whole big picture of why we are holding this session at the end of today, while you've had hours to think and brainstorm, hear about challenges, hear about potential solutions, and the hope is that you take all of that into consideration with your own experiences so that you can share your thoughts with how we will operate for the next 5 years. So who is ACDS? Again, we've heard a bunch about ACDS, our programs team. Some of the team members are here as well. But in general, ACDS is a private nonprofit organization that was established to administer and develop programs and initiatives for housing and development goals, right? So we, in addition to working on housing and homelessness, We also have a financial literacy program. We have an in-house eviction prevention program. We also have a tenant-based rental assistance program, home buyer counseling, things like that. And in addition to that, we also come up with the county's 5-year consolidated plan. So I've given this presentation a lot of times. I have the slide in front of me, but I'm just going to talk. So the 5-year consolidated plan is going to drive the Arundel community development's efforts for the next 5 years, right? So 2026 through 2030. Within each of those 5 years, we will also develop annual plans that will be more specific for how we're going to reach our goals at the end of those 5 years. So in general, how do we create a consolidated plan? Thankfully, it's not just me sitting at a desk typing things up. It truly is going out, talking to the community. This is probably one of the most diverse groups I've had this conversation with, so I'm hoping it's going to be pretty interesting. But in general, we've been going around speaking with smaller groups. We've held sessions directly with people experiencing homelessness at Sarah's House Shelter and at the Lighthouse. We will be going to Arundel House of Hope as well if we haven't already. I have another team member who I split these with, so I can't remember where we've been yet. And in addition to that, we are working with a consultant who's doing a lot of data analysis. She uses data from the county as well as federal and state data to kind of overlay and really understand analytically, you know, to better define the challenges and better understand the impact that solutions will have. So our listening session and consultations, these are those groups that I talked about that we've been going to and speaking with. The slide got a little jumbled, but I tried to put some examples at the bottom there of who we've spoken to. So we've spoken with county agencies and other partners, different advocates, the Coalition to End Homelessness, the Benevolence Coalition, community members, and like I said, people with lived experience. And I think there are even people with lived experience in this room today, so I really just want to reiterate, you know, what homelessness looks like, and it really doesn't have a look, it's all of us, right? So what have we done in the past? Our past 5-year plan had some guiding principles. These will be changed or updated for our next 5-year plan, depending on what we hear today and what we've heard in different groups. But in general, affordable housing has always been really a top priority, especially in Anne Arundel County, as well as prioritization of new units and creating those communities of opportunity. Revitalization projects and public services located in neighborhood vitalization areas to be prioritized. So in the past, we've really done a lot of work to identify geographic areas which in the past have been underserved, right, for a lot of reasons that we heard about today. And so really trying to do the work to, I don't want to say correct past mistakes, but try and level the playing field and really look at things from an equity lens. Some goals that went along with those strategies, just examples, were pathways to homeownership, affordable and safe rental housing, homeless prevention, community revitalization, and economic stability. All right, so this is where you all come in. I've kind of laid the foundation of where we are and what we're going to be talking about today. Well, this afternoon. We've been talking all day about affordable housing, about housing instability, about community needs, about development, and so I'd like to hear from you. So I have team members who they don't have microphones yet, but there are microphones on these chairs. If I can have folks come up and grab those, please. We're gonna have one person on this side of the room, one person on this side of the room, walking around with mics. So these are our questions for today. Looking at them, I feel like we're gonna touch on some things that are not necessarily in the questions just after today's whole symposium, but I'm gonna read them off the slide. They're gonna stay there while we're talking, and you'll see this fancy orange QR code. So if you scan that, it will take you to a Google survey that has all of these questions in it. So if you have thoughts after the symposium that you want us to include, or any sorts of follow-ups, if you want people who aren't here today to have the opportunity to provide input, we can share this QR code and the survey link after the symposium. Yes. Did you have a question, or were you ready to speak? Sure, what's up? Thank you, Anonia.
Hello, great speeches today and lots of awesome information from all of the speakers. I work at the Housing Authority. I wanted to know, in relation to one of the questions, what are the barriers as far as attaining housing opportunities? Part of one of the functions that we do is that those that are no longer interested in living in public housing have the opportunity to obtain a housing choice voucher to go out into the community to find their own housing. And it's sort of what we consider in the housing authority world as the natural progression of on the road to sustainability and self-sufficiency, public housing, housing choice voucher, private market, home ownership. And so along that spectrum, but what we found is that we are issuing vouchers to persons whose name comes up on our wait list, and it's very difficult for persons to find affordable housing in Anne Arundel County to actually utilize the voucher. We often have to grant extensions for time. The maximum amount of time to find housing once you're issued a voucher is 180 days under federal law. Many times people aren't even able to find housing within that period. So my question is, since income discrimination is a protected status in Maryland, what are some things that are being implemented to actually track that aspect? Because I feel that although it's protected, there's no teeth behind enforcement of income discrimination. So oftentimes our clients are not able to find housing simply because landlords don't want to rent to people with Section 8 vouchers. I mean, point blank, period. And so what either carrots or sticks are going to be utilized to actually have the protected status have meaning other than it just being on the books? Because right now the reality is that it's very difficult for people to utilize vouchers, and they end up right back in public housing, and that is why there's no natural middle step to get out of public housing. The gap is just way too large as far as affordability, because landlords don't want to accept the payment standard rents. Related to that, I've brought this up several times, but is there ever going to be a landlord mitigation fund created to help landlords who might experience challenges when they are involved in a subsidized program to deal with the gaps that they may experience to be able to accept more vouchers?
Thank you. Lisa, I'm sure, has updates on that. She does this work at our office at ACDS. Thank you for your question.
So yes, Melissa, you're exactly right. Source of income is a prohibited, you cannot discriminate based on source of income under state law and under local Anne Arundel County law, City of Annapolis as well. It still happens. We know that. In the audit testing that we did working with the Equal Rights Center, we focused on testing for source of income discrimination based on disability, which was primarily parking and emotional support animals, and then race and ethnicity. By far, the biggest problem was source of income. We know it's illegal. most landlords know that it's illegal. Some, believe it or not, do not know that it is unlawful to say they don't accept vouchers. So we're working this year coming up on, as I mentioned earlier, a fair housing webinar series. Our very first session in November is going to be on source of income discrimination. The teeth, it's hard. I know we have somebody here from Maryland Commission on Civil Rights, and they do those investigations regularly. At the local level, we're not yet doing enforcement actions, but we are building up. The Office of Equity and Human Rights is staffing up. They have put, our county has put a lot of resources into that office and the Human Relations Commission so that the commission is able to hear those complaints and actually do something about it. In the last legislative session, the county was granted subpoena power. The county's Human Relations Commission was granted subpoena power, so we can really investigate now with that added piece of added tool. Because you can ask for information, but if you don't have subpoena power, you may not get it. It's coming. Enforcement is coming. We're not quite there yet. One thing, though, is that our Office of Equity and Human Rights is very, very focused on educating and mediating. So even though there's not a big enforcement action going on right now, that office really is stepping in and mediating and educating in those instances where the landlords are not doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. And I don't know if you have more to add from MCCR.
Hi, everybody. I'm Stephen. I investigate housing discrimination with the Maryland Commission on Civil Rights. We operate out of Baltimore, but we cover the entire state. So source of income cases are crazy on the rise right now. I helped resolve a case where a landlord was saying that the income requirements had to be 3 times the monthly rent. And when she was kind of gently reminded, hey, this doesn't really apply to voucher holders are only responsible for covering 3 times their portion of the rent. And she doubled down, she tripled down. We showed her all sorts of infographics. Eventually, we were able to settle it for $15,000 for the complainant. So something that she wouldn't have had ordinarily, and it is teeth. And we actually had some required training for the landlord as well. Because even after all this, even after she's doing this payout, she still says she did nothing wrong, and she says, oh, I'm on the board of the Maryland Association of Realtors. I've had lawyers tell me that this is legal. Ma'am, it's not. So if anyone has any questions, I have cards, I have information. Source of income is huge. It's only going to get more and more prevalent as these landlords come up with new ways to kind of hedge the discrimination, to try to cover it beneath fancy words and flowery language.
Thank you.
I just wanted to also address that second part about the Landlord Mitigation Fund. And yes, I believe actually that is in the works. It's something we were looking at the beginning of COVID. Actually, when I first started with ACDS, we were looking at that type of program. So I would say stay tuned, and hopefully that will be coming on board.
I was just going to say, I believe landlord mitigation is also a part of the program design for ACDS's Moving Home program, which has been pretty successful. And so I think scaling that up and considering something like that in the 5-year consolidated plan makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Yes. I've decided I'm not going to read the questions to you out loud because you can all read, and we're having a great conversation. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Nikki Smith-Key. Just following up on the education question and the idea of having a webinar.
Mm-hmm.
How are we getting to the people who need to hear this? Because many of them will never watch a webinar. Great.
So, flyers just finalized yesterday for this series. So your Office of Equity and Human Rights has already sent out an email to people. We are really focused on getting the word out. I know that our office has sent out emails to all of our partners. The series is going to be directed toward housing providers, landlords, tenants, lenders, appraisers. It's going to provide broad information. People can sign up for one session. They can sign up for all 6 of them. It will end in April with Fair Housing Month, with a general fair housing rights, know your rights in fair housing. Getting the word out is going to be hopefully everyone's responsibility. If you will share it with your partners, share it with your clients. You don't have to be in Anne Arundel County. It's a webinar. We're happy to have anybody. We want to focus on Anne Arundel County residents and housing providers, but we're really excited about this program and hope it gets out to tons and tons of people.
We're also going to be sending it out to the full listserv for the Coalition to End Homelessness, if that didn't already happen this afternoon. And I've already shared the flyer with the lead of the Coalition's training committee. So the hope is that providers at the people who work at the service provider organizations will have an opportunity to take those webinars as well. I'd love to hear question 2. What has changed in the last 5 years? Oh, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Justin Paleska. I also work for the Anne Arundel County Office of Equity and Human Rights, joined by my colleague with Dr. Nikki Smith-Key. I just wanted to also point out and emphasize Lisa's point that our office does concurrently, sometimes cooperate with MCCR on civil rights investigations, and that does entail fair housing, that our county does have investigative use, but not yet enforcement. So I just wanted to emphasize that point and get it across that, like Lisa said, it's coming. Our civil rights investigator and I and our director, Mikkel Hicks and Asha Smith, it's all in the works. And we're hoping to have that rectified as soon as possible. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I may have the inside scoop, but I'm Chauncey Hall. I work for ACDS. But I want to just tell you about what's going on in the programs that I administer that still have a big need for us. I handle most of the client-related programs. So I think what happened when COVID hit, it exposed, I think Pam said it, something that exposed a lot of people. Now everybody thinks that things are better. Things are really the same, and it just exposed that more people need help. I have hundreds of people that need to get into housing, homeownership, looking for homeownership, but the market is very difficult, as the young lady said about vouchers. Actually, we look forward to people with vouchers because it's usually only the time that we can have someone have a voucher and have our down payment assistance and other layers. So instead of one layer, they may need 3 or 4 layers. I have people now that still having problems with rental assistance. We one of the few, we actually the only county in the state that still administer the rental assistance program. Get clients every day that need help. So I still need to plead for funds for different things for us. I have people that's now losing their homes to foreclosure. It's not on the national scene anymore, so people are not talking about it, but we see it every day. We fighting the fight with local. We used to have funding. Now we're back to just offering counseling. So we need help with the funding for counseling because the funding is gone. So again, COVID has exposed a lot of things, but we got to let people know that this fight is not over. Housing. I see several things with now we're seeing seniors that need help. Someone was mentioning, I think it was Tony Pratt, and Delegate Henson was talking about healthy homes. I'm getting such a spike in those applying under our property rehab program. This program is for low to moderate income families to do general repairs on their house. And the costs are so high that they can't afford it, so they come to us. and we try to utilize our funding that we have on a federal and state level to help them. A lot of these clients need $60,000, $70,000 worth of work, so we only have so much that's going in. So we still need help in various ways for renters and home buyers and for homeowners. We still need the funding. We still got to fight to try to help because it's not going away. I think it's going to get worse, but again, I see it as COVID has exposed things, and it's good. It's opened our eyes to say, okay, now we need to change things around that what we used to do, now we need to do things differently. So that's
Hi again, everyone. So one of the things my agency does is to work with families who are about to be homeless or who are actively homeless. My staff are here in the audience this afternoon, and please feel free to speak up, every one of you. But what we are seeing is that, first of all, the economic situation has got worse for the poorest in our communities. It used to be that you could work 2 jobs as a family and just about make it. Now you probably need 3 jobs to make it in this county. And the problem with COVID, apart from everything else, apart from the increased trauma and so on, was that it also, because we had a lot of federal funding during that period, it almost hid what was happening during those years. And what was happening during those years was that many families were building up debt. Many families had opted for budget billing with BG&E, and if you do not know about budget billing, I would suggest you learn about it because it is the #1 trap for families. What happens is it's okay when you can pay every month. When you don't pay every month, you don't just owe that month. You owe everything that you built up during that period of budget billing. More families end up in homelessness related to budget billing than almost anything else. So we've got this sort of perfect storm now of massively rising rents, a shortage of affordable housing, families who are not making it and are borrowing Peter to pay Paul every day, and less every day federal funds to be helpful. We are really fortunate in this county, and I will shout out Chair Pickard for this, that we actually get to use some affordable housing to actually help families who are either about to be homeless or are falling into homelessness. Because although there are lots of marvelous things happening in terms of building and some of the programs that you've heard about today, it won't happen fast enough for the families who are homeless now. They are choosing to sleep in cars when the weather's warm, and they are moving into hotels when the weather is cold. They are a growing number. There's over 1,000 students a night in our school system who are homeless. It is a really growing issue, and the conditions that surround it are less and less favorable to those families coming out. So listen to Melissa and listen to Chauncey. Yes, we need affordable housing, but we also have a circumstance now here in the county of a growing number of families who are homeless right here in River City, and we got to do something about it. Thank you.
Just since Pam was just standing, I know that I've spoken with the partnership a number of times on very kind of specific gaps in services that they've seen for the families that Pam is talking about. And I wonder if other folks have maybe seen that in this room, where, you know, something would be really useful to a family or to an individual, but it's just not available or it's too difficult to kind of attain. I figured there would be. Thank you, Myzetta. There you go.
I think a lot of what I'm seeing, especially over the last 30 days, isn't so much that something is too difficult, is that the amounts of the BG&E are so high that it's making it difficult to really help the families, because they have this bill that's $4,000, and then they may have another bill that's $2,000. So by the time you help one family, you're almost at $10,000. And how many times can you do that? So we have to look at what we can do and how realistic it is. And then will they be able to sustain afterwards? And that's what we continue, especially with BG&E, we run into that block all the time. If we clear this bill, how long will you be before you come back? And that's really the barrier that I'm seeing over the last 30 days for a lot of families.
Thank you.
I realize this is just a thought she was mentioning about that, because we receive calls every day now, mostly about BGE problems. And we try to navigate, negotiate. We work with all the different organizations here that we can work with, $200 here, 500 there, so on and so forth. We work in a different area, but at least if we get the call, we're going to try to help advocate for the people. I know this is like dipping into another fund, but the Housing Trust Fund that was started in the county, which is such a great idea, and as they said, it's one of its only kind in the state. Can we do some kind of another trust fund that is helpful so that it's a guarantor for the BGE? The only reason I say that is we were working with one woman who she had 90% of the money. And I was sort of angry, and I said, you just call BG and you tell them I said that they have to do that, you know, as if it was going to make a difference. Well, guess what? It made a difference. They were able to put her back on a budget. Now, maybe that's not the way to go, but the idea is, we were talking about the Housing Trust Fund. Is there a way for us, you know, so the BGE they want a guarantee that they're going to get that money if they approve to go through it. So I'm wondering if we can have something like that, so that there's always, it's not that we pay the $5,000 right up front, but what we do is we let them get back on the budget and we guarantee that they'll stay on it, kind of thing. So I don't know, just a thought.
I appreciate your creativity. It's going in the notes, so it's an option. Perfect. Yes. Yep. Sorry, Erin.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Like Mike said, I want to make sure other folks have a chance to talk, but just, we wear one hat where we, do the county's planning around fair housing and this consolidated plan, but we also wear the hat where we're working with developers and we're working to promote affordable housing construction to kind of help bridge that gap in the supply that was talked about earlier. So, I mean, one thing, we have the Housing Trust Fund. It's great. The impetus behind it was originally to kind of have this fund to help subsidize additional production. During COVID, we had all this wonderful money and resource from the federal government for eviction prevention, a lot of other really creative programs. And so now some of the trust fund money is kind of backfilling some of that. And the needs are still there. They didn't end with COVID. Eviction prevention has been mentioned. So we're now, thankfully, we spent our federal funds wisely, I think. Our ARPA funds, we just expended those by the deadline. So we kind of used those judiciously as we could, but while still helping people in emergency situations. And we were able to advocate, and the administration listened to be able to utilize, and the county council, to utilize housing trust funds for eviction prevention. But I don't think this problem is going away. So, it's a tricky balance between operating subsidies, demand side subsidies like that, like the tenant-based rental assistance that's supporting our successful moving home program, that's giving vouchers to people experiencing homelessness, getting them into housing that they can then take over ideally in the next year. So those are great, but they're finite resources. And so we really do need an ongoing source of operating funds. We've been able to launch a Next Step operating grant to help organizations like the Community Action Agency create group housing for people exiting incarceration. Wonderful program. I'd love to replicate it 50 times. We've got the capital money to support that, but we need some more operating resources. And then secondly, I just want to say, as we are looking, and we didn't really get into this at the panel earlier this morning, but we've got the Housing Attainability Act, which really is a great tool for inclusionary housing from a fair housing perspective. I know Councilwoman Pickard mentioned that. I love it from a fair housing perspective. The other piece, though, if we're talking about meeting the need for subsidized units, we need to be able to create units in different parts of the county. It can't be all concentrated in areas where we always have affordable housing. And I think part of that is we need people to show up. I want to give big props to ACT. They came to the, yeah, go ahead, you can do that. Yeah. You know, they show up for council meetings, like when the Housing Attainability Act was being heard, but also when things that aren't so, you know, sexy, I'll say, like comprehensive rezoning. You know, the NIMBYs outnumber the YIMBYs by like 50 to 1. So we need people to show up and say, we want affordable housing in our communities. And that's especially important from an equity standpoint. That's all.
Thank you. Go ahead, Lisa.
Sound of my voice on a microphone, so I was gladly letting you go. So my name is Vicki Dallaire. I am from Love Wins Movement and the Church at Seven Run, and so I was going to talk about BG&E just like on a personal note. Ridiculous, okay? Like, I don't have a mansion, and my BG&E was like almost as much as my mortgage last month, and it was insane. And I thought somebody may be stealing my electricity. And then I got my little thing in the mail that said, no, your usage is the same as this time last year. And I'm like, how did that work? I don't believe that anyway, by the way. Sorry if anybody here is from BG&E. The second thing that I noticed is, so we do a lot with addiction recovery, food insecurity, workforce development. And, you know, one of the big things is the amount of people that are actually food insecure that live in homes in our county that are literally like one break job away from losing everything. There's so many people that are falling through the cracks, and that's why, like, I love Pam's work of just like, what are we missing before? Like, let's address it before we get to the fact that they're living in their car. But I get that everything is a very weighted problem. But we see a lot of people that can't afford basic necessities. The credit card bills are outweighing any kind of income that they could possibly receive. And believe it or not, pets are a huge thing. So when we have people that are living, I mean, in our parking lot, and they will not go into a shelter because they have a dog that they consider an emotional support animal. And I mean, it is like they are choosing to live on the street because there's no one that will take their pet. Sounds ridiculous to somebody who's like in a house going, no, just go into a house, but that's all they have. And so I think also with that is there's not a lot of, when we talk about innovative solutions, there's not a lot of placement models that will take you where you are. Like, you have to, okay, men over here, women over here, and if children under the age of 5 are one of the most displaced, why do they all have to be separated, right? And I know they don't all have to be, but we don't have the capacities to meet people where they are. If I'm a homeless family, I need to be able to go with my family and then start obtaining services. And that's hard because a lot of the solutions that we have are kind of bulk treatment, right? We kind of address it with a certain model, and there's so many people that it's outweighing the models that we have, so we have to start thinking outside of the box and saying, like, what are we gonna do about people that can't or won't go into a shelter because I have kids, or I don't wanna be separated from my wife, or I don't wanna leave my dog, or there's nothing that's like meeting people where they are and walking them forward in a way that makes them not anxious or afraid of authorities or people that are coming in. And then our crisis systems, you know, crisis response, they're a godsend, but they are overwhelmed. And the systems are taxed. And so anyway, there's not enough supply, way too much demand. And but we're all doing the best we can, right? But BG&E.
Yeah, I'm Paul Christensen. I'm with Growth Action Network. I've been listening to all of this today, and it seems to me the elephant in the room here when we talk about affordable housing is finance. How do we pay for it? And then the next question, where to put it. But first, how do you pay for it? And I hear about the Housing Trust Fund. There's a lot of pressure on it to do a lot of things, but it's been a good start. It seems like Montgomery County has like $100 million in their equivalent, and we're way below that, as I understand it. Question is, what can we do to get more money into something like Housing Trust Fund? Does anyone have any idea? I think, you know, it has to come out, in a way, it has to be, the Housing Trust Fund has to be taxpayer. And it seems like if we really want affordable housing, there's no free lunch. We're gonna have to pay for it. And so let's not shy away from it, you know? Let's stand up and say, okay, we want it, we're willing to put dollars into it, raise the taxes, or whatever it takes. But we need to have more money in those.
Thank you. Say something.
So I was just going to pile on with BGE, and not just to say that's it's a huge problem. People can't afford it, but once that energy is turned off, once the electricity is turned off, the next step is a notice of intention to evict because it constitutes a breach of lease. So it's a gateway. You know, failing to pay your BGE and having your electricity turned off is a gateway to eviction. So it is something that, if addressed early enough on, can make a difference. But once the electricity is turned off, I mean, you can negotiate and you can plead for it not to result in a breach of lease, but you know, it technically is a breach of lease that can lead to grounds for eviction. So again, I don't know where the money comes from, but it is something it's crucial. Much like water, but the water bills are, you know, they're high, but not necessarily as much of a problem that we keep seeing. So that was all I wanted to add. And I'm sure if there's a lull in the conversation, I'll think of something else.
This sort of notion that because you're homeless, you have to give up your pet. Well, imagine if you were in the middle of the worst crisis of your life and you had to give up your dog. It is unconscionable that we ask families to do that. So I talked to our new animal shelter person at the county, and she's willing to try and create some sort of a program for pets so that we could have a place to put pets while we look after families and try and get them back to stability. But we need money. So of course we need money. So if anybody can think about how we might make that happen. But I just think, you know, losing your home is such a huge trauma, especially for the children. And can you imagine if then you have to just give up your dog or your cat that you've had for 6 years, as well as being in this horrible trauma? You've probably had your stuff put out on the street. It's an awful, awful thing that we do. And I don't think we who live in houses think about that you don't just lose your home. You lose all the things that you most, you know, that make you feel most safe. So I don't know, Erin. I don't know where I find money for pets, but I need some money for pets. Yes, they are. Yep.
Hi, everybody. Heather Cassidy. I'm trying to keep my thoughts only on affordable housing, but
However, Aaron, since you brought up the that last point, working in homelessness services for almost a decade, this county needs a low barrier shelter. And our shelters are always at capacity, but there's also a whole part of the population that doesn't qualify for coming into a shelter because of their mental health, because of their health issues. How many people showed up at our door and they weren't able to be ambulatory because they were just released from Anne Arundel Medical Center or a nursing home or some sort of short-term rehab, and the shelters are not the right place for that person to convalesce and to get back up on their feet. And so there's a whole subset of this population that we're dealing with that are experiencing homelessness that the shelters are not the right place for. And also, too, when you have to live in a congregate setting, it is so difficult. Think about if you had to go live with 15, 30, 45 other people in one room. That is hard. I've been in boot camp. I had to live with 45 other women. It's difficult for somebody that is rational and somebody that is, trying to do all the right things. When you're dealing in trauma and your entire life is in crisis, it is extra hard. And once you're down on your feet, it is exponentially harder for you to get back to somewhere stable. So if we could be doing things to prevent that from the beginning, we would be much better off. Our shelters wouldn't be at capacity. There would be other places for people to go. So I'm sorry I had to put that out there, but thank you.
Hi, my name is Claudia Bledsoe. I'm with Housing Initiative Partnership. I just remembered as we were talking about how to get more funding and money, and these things all require capital, and someone presenting earlier had mentioned about the issue of we have a lot of jobs, but we don't have a lot of housing. And I remember from some other conference kind of similar to this that was online, and I'm trying to remember what it was, but it was some state in New England. It might have been Massachusetts or Connecticut. But they were talking about how one of their hospitals was their biggest job source, but they don't have housing. So the city or county government partnered with the hospital to work together to provide affordable housing. And I was just wondering about what the county does to partner with businesses, as can they have an active role in helping create the affordable housing they need? And it sounded from things that people were saying earlier, they understand that it's critical to have affordable housing to retain employees, and that it's less expensive. But that was just a thought that came.
I know I'm looking at Workforce Development Corps over there. They're on the Homeless Coalition with us. I'm sensing some future partnerships.
My name's Laurie Nelson, and I help facilitate the Benevolence Coalition. And I just wanted to put it out there that so much of, rent and utilities are paid by churches. And I don't know if that money is ever tracked, but I mean, probably a year or so ago, we tracked it, and we probably, as one congregation, supplied probably $75,000 worth of utility, rent, food cards, gas cards, and I'm sure probably St. Vincent de Paul, I don't know, twice as much as that. But I don't know if, because then not having that number, you don't really know what the shortfall is, because you have these churches that are sort of anonymously coming alongside all of the other organizations that have money. So it's just, I think, this is about budget-wise. So.
Thank you, Laura. All right, we have about 15 minutes left. I know that this is our last session before the end of the day. Are there any other final thoughts to share before we close this? Okay. I'm going to remind everyone about this QR code, and then I just kind of want to go through what next steps are after today. So next steps in our planning process, and again, I'm sorry about the coloring on the slides. The first one that you can see is the public hearing that just passed. It has an asterisk to that effect. The next, and I'm just going to say this out loud, is January 9th at 4:30 to 6:30 will be a working session where we are going to be kind of synthesizing all the feedback that we've received so far and talking again as a group with whoever is able to attend about more specifically those strategies and goals that will be included in the plan for the next 5 years. And then the last, on Thursday, February 27th at 5:30, we will be having our second public hearing, or I guess third this year because of the extra consolidated plan one in the middle, where we will be presenting the plan as well as funding recommendations for the next fiscal year as ACDS. So if anyone has any questions, Elisha Herrig-Blaine, our Assistant Planning Director, his contact is right there. I also have some cards on me if anyone wants to connect with me afterwards. And we just would love to hear from you. If you do have any other thoughts about strategies, about identifying needs, things that you're driving home and you think about, oh, I really should have talked to someone about that, please reach out. Again, you can use that. Is the QR code at the end? Of course not. So I'll go back to that page in case anyone wanted to grab it again. But I really appreciate all the feedback you guys have given today and all the time that you've spent here today. I know that everyone is doing a hard job and is making a difference in our community. So I just want to close out this presentation with that and thank everyone for being here.